March 24th, 1603, Richmond Palace. For 45 years, she had been the sun, the eternal icon of English power, Elizabeth I, Gloriana.
But the scene of her death is, it's the complete opposite of the myth she built, right?
Completely. She's not resting peacefully. She is dying, standing up, literally propped up with cushions, refusing to lie down in her bed for weeks.
And her eyes are wide open, just fixed on shadows that only she can see.
While her ladies-in-waiting are whispering in the chambers that the queen had finally, lost her mind.
It's a profoundly unsettling final image, and it just screams that the story we all know, the tale of the serene, calculating queen is, well, it's incomplete.
Because what happened in those final weeks was a physical and psychological breakdown of epic proportions.
It's the moment where the superhuman image could no longer hold the human reality.
And what's crucial for our deep dive today is this one sensory detail that the court tried so desperately to ignore, the smell. According to multiple contemporary accounts, Richmond Palace didn't just smell like a sick room, heavy with fever. It smelled of profound, inescapable decay.
Something truly rotten, yes. And we know the lengths they went to mask it. Servants were constantly deployed, scrubbing floors and walls with massive amounts of rosemary, lavender, potent oils.
Anything they could find.
Anything. They burned incense in censers until the smoke was choking them, making their eyes water. It was like a chemical warfare against a stench that was quite literally seeping out of the queen's chambers.
And not just from the usual filth of the era, but from something else.
Exactly, from an internal corruption. This was the smell of a body that had begun to fail internally, even while the mind, or at least the will, still demanded control.
Okay, let's unpack this, because that smell of secrets is our entry point. Our mission today is to look beneath the layers of silk, the elaborate jewels, and that carefully constructed legend of the Virgin Queen.
Because the truth about Elizabeth's survival, her private health, and the physical cost of her reign was so dangerous, so volatile, that it was quite literally locked away 4 centuries ago.
We are analyzing the physical and psychological toll of a magnificent reign that required Elizabeth to perform as an ageless divine icon every single day.
Maintaining the image of Gloriana was a necessity. It was a political weapon against a hostile Europe. But as our sources reveal, maintaining that weapon forced her into a kind of calculated self-destruction of her own body and mind.
And the immediate intrigue that just sets the stage for everything. Why have the British authorities, century after century, consistently refused access to Elizabeth I's remains?
It's the big question, isn't it? We know Richard III was exhumed, analyzed extensively, reburied with great ceremony in 2012.
We've examined other Tudor figures, but for Elizabeth, any attempt to verify the historical rumors has been met with a complete and absolute denial.
It raises a fundamental historical question. What is so vital about the mystery of Elizabeth that the physical truth must remain sealed? Whatever is encased in that lead coffin, whatever medical reality they feared would be exposed, it's been judged a greater threat to the monarchy's foundational myth.
The idea of the pure, politically sacrificing Virgin Queen.
A greater threat than any foreign challenge. The secret is still considered too potent to reveal.
So if the end was decay and control, we need to understand the crucible that created this unparalleled need for absolute performance.
Which means we start not with her reign, but with her childhood. Let's call it the school of survival.
If you want to grasp Elizabeth's iron control, you have to understand the sheer, unrelenting trauma she endured as a child. Growing up in the court of Henry VIII was not a privileged position.
No, not at all. The source material describes it less as a royal palace and more as a slaughterhouse.
A slaughterhouse.
It was conditioning through terror, and the education was relentless. The seminal trauma, of course, occurred in 1536. Elizabeth is not yet 3 years old when her mother, Anne Boleyn, is executed on charges of treason and incest.
She didn't witness the beheading itself, but she was close enough to hear it.
Oh, absolutely. She would have heard the roar of the massive crowd gathered outside the tower walls, followed by that horrifying sudden silence.
And for a child, that silence must have been louder than the roar. The political reality hit immediately. They stripped her of her title, declared her a bastard, and her status just evaporated overnight.
The lesson she internalized was devastatingly simple. Weakness kills you. Being female kills you. Needing anything from anyone ensures your destruction.
And she was forced to watch this gruesome masterclass in survival from that point forward. She watched the revolving door of Henry VIII's wives.
Recognizing that their fate was entirely dependent on external whim and perfect performance. Take Anne of Cleves. She survived by being smart enough to accept rejection and maintain a useful relationship as the king's sister, rather than fighting or falling into disgrace.
And then you have the tragic lesson of Catherine Howard.
Young, beautiful, and utterly foolish in her lack of calculation. She offered everything the king wanted physically, but had no psychological armor, and she died for it.
The lesson was clear. Adapt or die.
Submit strategically or die horribly. Elizabeth couldn't afford to be the conventional meek woman of her era who relied on marriage or beauty for status. She had to build an internal defense that transcended her biological status.
And that's where she built her intellectual fortress. She countered her perceived weakness, the fact that she was female and disposable, by focusing so intensely on classical education.
She mastered Latin, Greek, French, and Italian. She studied philosophy, theology, rhetoric. She was trained by some of the greatest minds of the era, not just for personal enrichment, but as a survival tool.
The goal was to make herself so valuable, so irreplaceable intellectually, that the men around her might forget she was female and recognize her as an indispensable political asset.
It was the ultimate long-term strategy of a child who knew her life was always on a knife edge.
This intense psychological training prepared her for the ultimate test, the Tower of London in 1554.
Right when her Catholic half-sister, Queen Mary I, imprisoned her on suspicion of treason.
For 2 months, Elizabeth lived in a waiting room for death. She was held in rooms where other victims of Tudor politics, her own mother among them, had spent their final, desperate hours.
Every stone of the tower bore witness to execution. She was under constant aggressive interrogation, knowing Mary had both the political motive and the personal desire to see her removed.
And the source suggests she survived this not just because the evidence was circumstantial, but because she gave the perfect, calculated performance of compliance.
She transformed her terror into utility. She convinced Mary that executing her would only martyr her in the eyes of Protestant England and create far more political instability than keeping her confined.
So smart.
And when she was confronted harshly, she would feign profound illness, collapsing into feverish fits to interrupt the interrogation. She appeared humble, obedient, and conveniently Catholic when Mary's agents were watching. Every word, every controlled tear was strategic.
That level of self-monitoring where every breath is a calculated political maneuver must have been just exhausting. It's a form of internal torture.
It is. And what was the lasting psychological cost of that survival mechanism? The source states clearly that the woman who walked out of the tower in 1555 was fundamentally changed. She was harder, colder, and absolutely committed to never, ever showing her real self, her vulnerabilities, her fears, her emotions, to anyone.
This became what one historian called the invisible fracture.
Yeah, she lost the ability to relax or connect genuinely. That armor, the commitment to total control, protected her during her ascent.
But the chilling truth is that the source material points out that this absolute commitment to control, which saved her life as a princess.
It ultimately broke, and then killed her as a queen. She could never put the armor down, even when the threats were gone.
So we move smoothly from the psychological formation of the queen to the most immediate political necessities she faced upon her accession in 1558, marriage.
Right. She's 25, the Protestant queen of a fragile nation, and the first thing her entire Privy Council, Parliament, and every foreign power demands is simple.
Get married, produce an heir, secure the succession.
The political establishment was united on the fact that a woman cannot rule alone. They feared anarchy, civil war, the end of the Tudor line. Marriage wasn't optional. It was the mechanism by which they intended to control her and secure the stability of the realm.
The pressure was intense and immediate, and Elizabeth's response was brilliant.
She put on the most famous, longest-running performance of her life, the suitor parade. She turned courtship into an instrument of international diplomacy, stringing along powerful rivals for years without ever committing.
It was masterful diplomacy through calculated flirtation and delay. Think about the strategic implications. Take Philip II of Spain.
Her dead sister's widower, the most powerful man in Europe. He offers marriage.
And Elizabeth plays coy, letting him believe she might accept, buying England vital years of peace to consolidate her power, thus avoiding war with the global superpower.
And the domestic suitors were just as complicated. She considered Archduke Charles of Austria, who's Protestant and, potentially a better match for religion.
But he was a Habsburg, and marriage would immediately drag England into continental wars and religious conflicts that she simply could not afford.
So she dragged out the negotiations, demanded impossible religious concessions, and then just let it drop. She kept them busy negotiating marriage alliances when they should have been planning invasions.
And the more transparently desperate they were, the more she exploited their interest. Remember Eric the 14th of Sweden?
Oh yeah, he sent increasingly flattering portraits, which Elizabeth would apparently hang up, gather her ladies, and genuinely laugh at his transparent attempts to woo her through art.
The closest she came to accepting a foreign royal was Francis, the Duke of Anjou, a young French nobleman, a Catholic. She called him her frog.
The negotiations were serious, and she toyed with the idea for years. It was the ultimate test. Marrying Anjou might have secured a crucial alliance with France against Spain.
But because he was Catholic, it would have immediately triggered a massive domestic revolt from Puritan elements who feared a return to Mary I's reign.
She knew marriage to a foreign Catholic was impossible politically, yet she maintained the fiction for strategic purposes, just to keep France placated.
But there was only one man who genuinely held her heart, the Earl of Leicester, Robert Dudley.
Dudley was her childhood friend. Handsome, ambitious, Protestant, he was the perfect personal match. The problem was his wife, Amy Robsart. And then in 1560, Amy is found dead at the bottom of a staircase with a broken neck.
The death was immediately ruled suspicious.
Whether accidental or murder, the scandal was immediate and overwhelming. Whispers erupted across England and Europe. Dudley killed his wife to marry the Queen, or worse, the Queen ordered it.
And Elizabeth was desperately in love and wanted to marry him.
But her most trusted advisors, especially William Cecil, were unanimous. They warned her that if she married a man widely believed to be a murderer, her legitimacy would be completely destroyed. Foreign powers would brand her a murderous whore, justifying invasion and domestic revolt.
She had to choose between personal happiness and the stability of the entire Tudor dynasty.
And as always, she chose the kingdom. But she kept him close, maintaining that lover dynamic, flirting openly, holding his hand in public.
Driving ambassadors insane trying to confirm if they were sleeping together.
It's highly unlikely they were physically involved. Elizabeth was intensely aware of the political ramifications of pregnancy. One bastard child would have destroyed her legitimacy and provided an immediate cause for her overthrow.
But their bond was profound, and this leads us to that incredible piece of historical evidence. Dudley's deathbed letter, found among her most private papers after her death.
It was tied with a ribbon and marked in her own handwriting, and it mentioned, "The truth we alone know," a secret that bound them in sorrow rather than joy.
What was that truth?
This is where the physical reality shatters the political myth. If she couldn't marry Dudley, and she refused every other powerful suitor who would have secured the succession, what if the Virgin Queen status wasn't a choice?
What if it was a lifetime of deception designed to hide a physical inability to bear children?
Exactly. Okay, so let's turn to the scattered, deeply confusing physical observations reported by foreign ambassadors, whose job it was to analyze her every weakness.
And their confusion is so telling because she did not fit the expected mold.
No. Spanish envoys and Venetian ambassadors noted her manly voice, her unusual heightened strength, and her more the bearing of a soldier than a lady. This wasn't just observing her confidence, it was physical description.
One Spanish envoy wrote specifically that Her Majesty's form is not as other women's, and he was recalled shortly after that.
Right. Unable to elaborate on the disturbing observation he had made. And then we have the specific, highly controlled medical incidents that sent tremors through the court, only for the details to be immediately locked down.
Like the 1566 incident when Elizabeth falls seriously ill.
She was suffering from a violent fever, severe sweating, and deep abdominal pain. She finally allowed a limited team of doctors to examine her, a profoundly rare occurrence for the notoriously private queen.
And Dr. Hewick, one of the physicians, emerges from her chambers.
And according to a courtier's detailed diary, he looked pale and troubled, as if he had seen something that shook him to his core. He refused point-blank to discuss what he had observed, even with his fellow medical professionals.
And suspiciously, he died conveniently less than a year later.
An observation so shocking it kills the messenger. And 2 years later, in 1568, the queen collapses during a Privy Council meeting. In the rush to revive her, her ladies-in-waiting loosen her incredibly restrictive clothing.
And one of them immediately faints upon seeing what was beneath the bodice.
What was revealed when her torso and midsection were exposed? The room was instantly cleared, and the incident was classified. This pattern of extreme privacy, shocking observations, and medical silence points strongly toward a hidden physical reality.
And this is where modern medical historians step in with the compelling theory of androgen insensitivity syndrome, or AIs.
Or related intersex conditions like testicular feminization. We should probably define AIS clearly for context.
Yeah, let's do that.
AIS is a condition where a person is genetically male, they have XY chromosomes, but they are born with and appear to have fully female external characteristics. This is because their body is completely unresponsive or partially unresponsive to testosterone.
So they look like a woman externally.
But crucially, internally, they lack functional female reproductive organs.
And why does this theory account for all the disparate historical observations?
It's the unifying theory. It explains the manly voice and greater strength, which are related to atypical hormone processing. It explains the reported lack of menstrual cycles, which historical sources vaguely reference. Most importantly, it explains her utter inability to marry and produce an heir despite the relentless political pressure to do so.
The truth they alone knew may have been her fundamental biological reality.
The woman who claimed she was married only to England may have been forced to create that political legend to hide the reality of a body that simply could not perform the one biological duty required of a queen.
Exactly. The scandal of Elizabeth being an intersex person unable to bear children would have been absolute ammunition for every Catholic plot in Europe. It would have destroyed the legitimacy of her claim to the throne.
The image of the divine sacrificing virgin queen was the politically necessary narrative. The physical truth was buried, and this confirmed why her sealed coffin remains the one unviolated piece of Tudor history.
That brings us to Section 3, the price of power. Whether the virginity was chosen or forced, maintaining the image of the invincible, immortal queen required a daily regimen of self-destruction.
And our sources describe her reliance on two daily torture devices, the poison mask and the whalebone cage.
Let's start with the poison mask, the source of her signature, ghostly white look, immortalized in the famous later portraits.
This porcelain facade was achieved using something called Venetian Sus.
Okay.
And this wasn't just makeup. This was a chemical weapon she applied to her own face every single morning.
The recipe was white lead, a heavy metal mixed with vinegar, sometimes with arsenic added for adherence.
And this wasn't just a superficial application. Lead is a notorious neurotoxin. It doesn't sit harmlessly on the skin. It's absorbed through the pores, enters the bloodstream, travels to the central nervous system, and accumulates in the bones and brain over time.
For Elizabeth, this was a continuous cycle of self-poisoning that spanned over 4 decades.
Let's connect the known symptoms of chronic lead poisoning to Elizabeth's documented health problems. The match is just startling.
It is a medical indictment of her reign. First, the severe, recurring headaches.
Elizabeth suffered from them her entire adult life, often debilitating enough to force the cancellation of major state appearances. This is classic lead neurotoxicity, irritating the brain and nervous system.
Second, the abdominal distress, the colic, and stomach cramps.
Right. Her ladies frequently recorded that she couldn't eat or suffered agonizing digestive pain again, highly consistent with lead damaging the gastrointestinal tract.
And the physical weakness, needing help to stand by her 50s.
That's the muscle and joint pain and the systemic weakness resulting from lead interfering with cellular function. But perhaps the most famous symptom, and the one that cost many a courtier their career, was her legendary temper and extreme mood swings.
Her famous outbursts, charming 1 minute, screaming and throwing things the next.
That unpredictable irritability is completely consistent with lead poisoning affecting the central nervous system, causing memory problems, confusion, and violent mood swings. We have anecdotes of her throwing objects, including a slipper, at her ministers.
And physically striking a lady-in-waiting across the face in a sudden blinding rage.
This was the chemical cost to the crown. She was quite literally being driven mad by her makeup.
And the cruel irony is that she was forced to keep applying this poison because the lead itself was destroying the very skin it was meant to beautify.
It was a vicious downward spiral. As the years progressed, the lead began to break down her skin, causing flaking, blistering, and open sores. Any attempt to stop the application would expose the failing flesh beneath, shattering the image of Gloriana.
By her 50s, she needed increasingly thicker, heavier layers of the Sus.
But the sources from her final years paint a truly horrific picture of the state beneath the mask.
Yes. By her 60s, secret testimony from her personal servants describes patches of her skin, particularly on her neck and chest, as blackened flesh.
This is the clinical term necrosis tissue death from decades of chronic lead exposure leading to ulceration. This blackened tissue would weep a thick yellow fluid. She was literally rotting alive underneath the porcelain mask, all hidden beneath silk ruffs and increasingly intricate cosmetics.
So, those later portraits, the rainbow portrait, the Ditchley portrait, where she appears impossibly smooth, ageless, and divine around 1600.
They are no longer portraits of a person. They are political propaganda. They are icons of a goddess who could not age, entirely divorced from the physical decay of the woman who was suffering beneath the heavy paint.
If a poison mask provided the slow chemical death, the whalebone cage provided the constant physical torment.
Let's discuss the structural torture of the corset. The fashion of the Elizabethan court demanded a tiny, rigid, almost geometric waistline. The corset, reinforced with whalebone, or sometimes wood, was necessary for this silhouette.
But for Elizabeth, whose body was crumbling from the lead and perpetual stress, the corset became structurally mandatory.
She needed it to stand for hours at state functions, maintaining that superhuman posture of invincibility.
And the compression was extreme. We are talking about reducing the waistline by 6 to 8 inches daily for 45 years. That is an astonishing, unrelenting degree of pressure.
The physical damage is staggering and permanent. I mean, imagine the organs being crushed over 4 decades. Her ribs would have been permanently bent and even cracked inward, making movement painful. Her lungs couldn't fully inflate, causing constant shallow breathing and chronic fatigue.
Her liver and spleen would have been compressed and displaced.
Her intestines were squashed, making digestion and elimination agonizing and contributing to the abdominal pain she suffered. This is essentially a state of constant, low-grade internal injury, inflicted purely to maintain a political image.
Absolutely. It restricted blood flow and caused continuous internal inflammation. Historians looking at autopsy records of high-ranking noblewomen from this era often find permanently deformed skeletal structures and severely displaced organs.
But with Elizabeth, we have that one incredibly vivid detail from the source material regarding her death.
The final imprint of the power structure on her body.
When the corset was finally cut off her corpse, her entire torso was covered in deep grooves. These were not temporary marks. They were permanent indentations in her flesh, where the structure of the whalebone and wood had pressed into her for 45 years.
The grooves were described as being so deep they looked carved.
Imprinted in her skin like a fossil. That single detail summarizes the entire cost of her reign. The armor she wore was not external, it was ground into her very being.
This story of physical destruction brings us to Section 4, the final act, where the political and physical realities violently collide.
But even as she performed the immortal goddess, she was haunted by her only true rival, Mary, Queen of Scots.
Mary was the countermyth. Catholic, legitimate in the eyes of many, and critically fertile, she had a son, James.
For years, every major Catholic plot against Elizabeth, the Rolfe plot, the Throckmorton plot, the Babington conspiracy, had Mary at its center. Her existence was a walking, breathing threat to Elizabeth's life.
Elizabeth hesitated for months before signing Mary's death warrant in 1587. Was that hesitation purely political calculation, or was there genuine anguish involved?
It was profoundly complex. Executing an anointed queen was terrifying. It undermined the entire concept of the divine right of kings, which was the very foundation of Elizabeth's own power. But once Mary was executed, Elizabeth fell into a severe, recognized depression.
And this raises an important question. Was the depression guilt over killing a cousin, or was it the bitter recognition that Mary, the woman she defeated, had secured the biological legacy that Elizabeth never could?
The source material leans toward the latter. It was the crushing acknowledgement of her own mortality and her failure to secure the succession biologically. Elizabeth won the war, but Mary's son would inherit the throne. For the ultimate survivalist, that was an incredibly painful form of defeat.
That emotional and political strain led directly into 1588 and the Armada crisis. This is where we get the Tilbury performance, arguably the most famous moment of her reign.
I have the body of a weak, feeble woman, but I have the heart and stomach of a king. That speech is the pinnacle of the Gloriana myth, the perfect synthesis of vulnerability and strength.
But the source material provides the disturbing reality beneath the armor. Elizabeth was 54, in constant pain from the lead and the crushing corset, and had just recovered from a severe illness.
She couldn't actually mount her horse without significant assistance. She had to be physically lifted into the saddle. She was given wine mixed with stimulants, likely powerful drugs, just to keep her alert and upright for the review of the troops.
She performed for 3 hours, projecting absolute confidence, defying the Spanish threat.
But the moment the performance was over, she collapsed completely. She was confined to her chambers for an entire week, and her doctors whispered about internal hemorrhaging. Her ladies noted that the triumph has cost her dearly.
She physically destroyed herself for the sake of that single world-defining moment of political theater.
As we move into the 1590s, the decline accelerates, psychologically and physically. The foundation of her life starts to crumble, starting immediately after the Armada with the death of Robert Dudley in 1588.
He was 55, dead from fever and illness, and Elizabeth's reaction was profound.
Locking herself away in her chambers for days, refusing to eat or speak to anyone, the grief was devastatingly real. She kept his last letter, the one mentioning the truth we alone know, pouched around her neck for the rest of her life. It was a constant reminder of the life she sacrificed.
Then came the disaster of her final favorite, Robert Devereux, the Earl of Essex.
Dudley's ambitious, reckless stepson, 20 years her junior, their relationship was volatile, defined by immense passion and equally immense fury.
And the ultimate betrayal, the most unforgivable sin, comes in 1601. Essex failed catastrophically in Ireland and rushed back to England, bursting into her private chamber unannounced early one morning.
He saw her without the mask.
Without the heavy wig, without the elaborate makeup, for the first time in decades, a man saw the real, aging Elizabeth.
The account says he was shocked into stammering an apology, seeing the withered, pale, and bald reality of the Queen. She never forgave him, not for the political failure, but for seeing her ultimate vulnerability.
So when he staged his pathetic coup attempt shortly after, she signed his execution warrant while weeping.
But the pen stroke was steady. That act of political ruthlessness, costing her the last emotional connection she had, signaled the beginning of the final collapse.
And the physical decay during these final years is just brutal to chronicle. By 1600, she'd lost most of her teeth due to the combination of lead poisoning and the compulsive consumption of sugar.
Her breath was terrible, which contributed to her increasing isolation. She had to stuff her cheeks with cloth to maintain the illusion of facial fullness, making speaking and eating incredibly difficult.
Her hair was completely gone, forcing her to rely on increasingly elaborate and heavy wigs. Her hands suffered from constant tremors, likely from accumulated lead toxicity, stress, and age.
And finally, we return to that pervasive, inescapable detail that defined her last months: the smell. The euphemistic court sources talk only of the necessity for much perfume and chambers that must be well aired daily.
But the private letter from the lady-in-waiting is explicit. She speaks of a corruption in Her Majesty's body, a smell of sickness and decay that pervaded her rooms.
This was not just superficial sickness. This was a profound internal failure, likely a massive tumor or widespread organ failure, exacerbated by the decades of lead neurotoxicity and physical constriction from the corset rotting while the Queen still fought to live.
By January 1603, the game was entirely up. In a final act of surrender, she reportedly stopped wearing the makeup, telling her ladies, "I am past caring what they see, let them look."
She stopped eating entirely because swallowing became agonizing, likely due to internal masses or severe ulceration of the throat and digestive tract caused by the lead. Her abdomen swelled grotesquely, likely from massive fluid accumulation due to organ failure.
Cruelly making her appear 6 months pregnant, the devastating final symbol for the Virgin Queen.
And then the refusal to surrender, the final bizarre 2 months where she would not lie down in her bed. It was her ultimate psychological defense. Once I lie in that bed, I shall never rise again.
She had spent 70 years refusing to surrender, and she would not do so at the last moment.
But medically, it was likely necessary. The intense pressure of the accumulated fluid in her abdomen would have made breathing impossible when horizontal, or perhaps the pain from her damaged, crushed organs was simply too much when reclining.
Her counselors finally corner her, securing the succession with a confused, weak nod toward James VI of Scotland on March 23rd. The second that political necessity was fulfilled, the absolute will surrendered.
They carry her finally to the bed. She stops breathing on March 24, 1603, and the immediate cover-up began.
Doors locked, guards posted as strict orders, "Speak of nothing you saw."
And the physical horror upon undressing the body is what sealed the truth away forever. The layers of makeup came off in sheets, often taking pieces of necrotic skin with it. The body was black, ulcerated, and covered in decay. The torso bore those deep, permanent corset grooves. The smell was overwhelming.
And critically, the servant who prepared the body noted the reproductive area was wrong, either absent or severely malformed, confirming the deepest, darkest suspicion of her life.
They wrapped the body instantly, sealing it in lead within hours, before rigor mortis even fully set in, trapping the truth inside. The servants were immediately dismissed and scattered. Her closest doctors conveniently died within a year. The silence was immediate and absolute.
And that silence has been maintained for over 4 centuries. James VI ensured that Elizabeth's tomb stayed sealed forever. We know requests in 1952, 1975, and 2003 to examine her remains were denied.
Despite the extensive analysis of Richard III's remains, the conclusion is inescapable. The risk of exposing the destruction, the lead, the crushed organs, the possible intersex condition was and remains too great for the enduring myth of Gloriana.
So, what does this all mean for the history we read and the woman we think we know?
It means that Elizabeth I ruled magnificently, building an empire that lasted centuries. But England killed her slowly with toxic makeup, impossible physical demands, and relentless political pressure.
Her reign was the ultimate triumph of pure, agonizing performance over a devastating physical and biological reality.
The evidence of that destruction was buried with her because the myth, the pure, eternal Virgin Queen, was the necessary foundation for the empire.
This deep dive really forces us to confront the fact that political necessity often demands that powerful figures sacrifice their human reality to become icons.
It makes her political success even more staggering, knowing the immense physical and psychological battles she fought, day in and day out, for 45 years.
It absolutely does. And if we connect this to the broader picture of national identity and historical narrative, the establishment decided long ago that the body must stay buried so the myth can survive.
But I want to leave you with this final provocative thought. If the British establishment finally allowed Elizabeth's remains to be examined, and the results confirmed the long-held theory of an intersex condition like androgen insensitivity syndrome, would the revelation enhance or diminish the monumental achievement of Gloriana, the woman who ruled against the biological odds for 45 glorious and agonizing years?
That's a legacy we're still fighting over.